Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine spending months planning the perfect wheelchair ramp, permits, inspections, receipts, only to get hit with a violation notice from a gated community you don't belong to. Then it escalates, fines, threats, and a security guard posted at the end of your driveway like you're a criminal. How did it get that far, that fast? The sound of the drill echoed through the morning air as I watched the contractor put the finishing touches on our new wheelchair ramp. After 3 months of planning, permit applications, and construction, we finally had it. The sleek aluminum structure curved gracefully from our front door to the sidewalk, and honestly, I was proud of it. This wasn't just some ugly afterthought bolted onto our 1950s bungalow. The contractor had designed it to complement the house's lines, and the brushed metal finish actually looked pretty modern against the brick exterior. My wife rolled her wheelchair down the ramp for the first time, and I could see the relief on her face. No more struggling with the 3 concrete steps that had made coming and going such a hassle since her accident 6 months ago. The ramp represented freedom, independence, and a return to normal life. The house itself was a steal when we bought it last year, a classic post-war bungalow sitting on a corner lot right at the edge of a gated community called the Willows. The realtor had been upfront about the location. We were technically adjacent to the fancy neighborhood, but never part of it. Our property was what they called an outlot, built before the developers came in and turned the surrounding farmland into a subdivision with gates and guards. I remember the realtor specifically mentioning this because some buyers wanted the prestige of living next to an exclusive community, while others wanted to avoid HOA fees and restrictions. We fell into the second category. The house was perfect for us, the price was right, and we loved the idea of having all the benefits of a nice neighborhood without someone telling us what color we could paint our shutters. The contractor packed up his tools and handed me the final paperwork. Everything was up to code, properly permitted through the city, and met all ADA requirements. We'd done everything by the book. I'm pretty obsessive about documentation, so I had a thick folder with every permit, every receipt, every inspection report, and every piece of correspondence with the city planning office. That evening, we celebrated with takeout on our front porch, watching the sunset and feeling grateful that this chapter of our lives was finally moving forward. My wife could come and go as she pleased again, and we had a beautiful, functional solution that would serve us for years to come. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker plastered right on our front door. The color was so garish it looked like a traffic cone had exploded. As I got closer, I could see it was some kind of official notice, and my stomach started to sink. Notice of violation was printed in bold red letters across the top. Below that, in smaller text, I read the details that made my blood pressure spike. Property address, our address, violation, unauthorized structural modification without HOA approval, secondary violation, use of non-compliant materials and colors, fine amount $500, date of compliance, required, within 5 business days, failure to comply, additional fines of $100 per day until violation is corrected. At the bottom, there was a signature from someone named Karen, identified as HOA Board President, the Willows Community Association. I stood there staring at this thing for a full minute, trying to process what I was reading. HOA approval? We weren't in any HOA. Our realtor had made that crystal clear. The house was specifically marketed as being outside the gated community's jurisdiction. I called my wife over and showed her the notice. She looked just as confused as I felt. "But we're not part of their association," she said. Remember, that was one of the selling points. I nodded, but something about this whole situation felt off. Why would they think they had authority over our property, and who was this Karen person? I'd never heard of her, never met her, never received any communication from any HOA since we'd moved in. The phone number on the notice had a local area code, so I decided to call and get this sorted out. Probably just a case of mistaken identity or confused addresses. Was left on my door this morning. I think there might be some mistake. What's the address? I gave her our address, and I heard the clicking of computer keys. Oh yes, the unauthorized wheelchair ramp. I drove by yesterday and documented it myself. That metal structure is completely inappropriate for our neighborhood aesthetic. It looks industrial, and honestly, it's bringing down property values for everyone. The way she said wheelchair ramp made it sound like we'd installed a sewage treatment plant in our front yard. I think you might be confused about something, I said, keeping my voice level. We're not actually part of the Willows HOA. Our house was built before the development, and we're not within the gated boundaries. She cut me off before I could finish. Everyone on this street falls under Willow's jurisdiction. I don't know who told you otherwise, but they were wrong. The ramp needs to be painted beige to match neighborhood standards, or it needs to be removed entirely. You have until Friday, or the fines double. Wait, can you just check your records again? I'm pretty sure we're not... Sir, I've been managing this community for 8 years. I know exactly which properties are under our authority. Paint it beige or tear it down. Those are your options. The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. This woman was absolutely convinced she had jurisdiction over our property, but I knew she was wrong. The question was, how do I prove it? That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse and pulled up the property records for our house. The deed was clear as day. Our lot was designated as unincorporated/non-HOA. There was no joinder agreement, no covenant filing, nothing that would indicate we'd ever been part of the Willows Community Association. I also pulled up the plat map for the whole area. The Willows was clearly marked with defined boundaries, and our property sat outside those lines by about 50 feet. We were literally on the wrong side of their fence. Armed with this information, I decided to try a diplomatic approach. I drafted a polite letter requesting copies of any CC&Rs or covenants that would apply to our property. I asked for documentation showing when and how our house had been annexed into their association. I sent it certified mail with return receipt requested because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that paper trails matter. The response came faster than I expected. Instead of the documents I'd requested, I got a cease and desist letter. They claimed I was in continued violation of community standards and threatened to have the ramp removed as unauthorized debris if I didn't comply immediately. But here's where things got really weird. The next day, I came home from work to find a security guard sitting in a golf cart at the end of our driveway. White uniform, clipboard, the whole 9 yards. He wasn't blocking our access, but he was clearly there to watch us. When I walked over to ask what was going on, he told me he was hired by the HOA as a courtesy officer to monitor the violation and ensure no further unauthorized modifications took place. Monitor us for what exactly? I asked. Just following orders, sir, making sure nothing else gets added to the property without proper approvals. This was getting ridiculous. They were literally posting a guard to watch our house because of a wheelchair ramp that we had every legal right to install. That evening, I got a call from my next-door neighbor. She was an elderly woman who'd lived in the area for decades, long before the Willows was even developed. "I heard about your trouble with the HOA folks," she said. "Thought you might want to know, Karen's been driving around the neighborhood in her golf cart for the past week, taking pictures of everyone's houses. She's got some kind of inspection checklist." This painted a picture that made a lot more sense. Karen wasn't just wrong about our property status, she was on some kind of power trip, expanding her authority beyond the actual boundaries of her community. "Has she bothered you about anything?" I asked. "Oh, she tried. Came to my door last month claiming my garden gnomes violated some kind of decoration policy. I told her exactly where she could stick her policy, if you know what I mean." I laughed despite the situation. It sounded like Karen had been making enemies all over the neighborhood, not just with us. The security guard stayed posted outside our house for 3 days. On Thursday morning, I found another notice on our door. This one claimed we now owed $2,500 in accumulated fines and late fees. They were threatening to file a lien against our property if we didn't pay within 10 days. That's when I decided enough was enough. I spent Friday afternoon researching attorneys who specialized in real estate disputes. I found someone who had experience with HOA overreach cases and scheduled a consultation for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I put together a comprehensive file. Property deed, county records, plat maps, all the correspondence from the HOA, photos of the security guard, receipts from the ramp installation, and copies of our city permits. Monday morning, I sat across from Attorney Johnson in his downtown office. He was probably in his 60s, with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen every possible variation of property dispute nonsense. I laid out the whole situation and handed over my file. He spent about 20 minutes reviewing everything, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification. "Well, this is pretty straightforward," he finally said. "They have absolutely no authority over your property. 0. Your house was never annexed into their association, and they can't just declare jurisdiction because they feel like it. So what are my options? Legally, you could just ignore them completely. Their fines are meaningless, and any lien they try to file would be invalid, but... He paused and looked at me over his reading glasses. But that's not necessarily your best strategy here. They've crossed several lines that could actually work in your favor. He explained that by threatening to remove a wheelchair ramp, they'd potentially violated the Fair Housing Act. By filing false violation notices and threatening invalid liens, they'd open themselves up to harassment claims. And by posting security to watch our house, they might be guilty of stalking or intimidation. If you want to make this go away quietly, I can send them a simple letter explaining that your property isn't under their jurisdiction. That'll probably end it. And if I don't want it to go away quietly, he smiled, then we make them very sorry they ever heard your address. I thought about my wife struggling up those concrete steps for months. I thought about the relief on her face when she could finally use the ramp. I thought about Karen's condescending tone when she dismissed our legitimate medical need as an eyesore. I thought about 3 days of having a guard watch our house like we were criminals. What would the nuclear option look like? Attorney Johnson pulled out a legal pad and started outlining a strategy. First, we file a formal complaint with HUD for Fair Housing Act violations. Harassing someone for installing disability accommodations is a federal offense. Second, we demand compensation for your legal fees, time, and emotional distress. Third, we threaten a lawsuit for slander of title if they actually file that lien. He estimated the whole package would take about 4 hours of his time to prepare and file. The cost would be minimal compared to the potential payout. How much should I ask for? Let's start with $5,000 for your trouble plus my fees. If they want to fight it, we'll add zeros. I hired him on the spot. Tuesday morning, Attorney Johnson's office sent a certified letter to every member of the Willows HOA board, not just Karen, but all 7 board members. The letter included copies of our property deed, the county plat map, and a detailed explanation of why their association had no authority over our house. But that was just the warm-up act. The letter also included formal notice that we were filing a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development for violations of the Fair Housing Act. Specifically, harassment and intimidation of a disabled person for installing federally protected reasonable accommodations. It detailed every phone call, every threatening letter, every fine notice, and every day that security guard sat outside our house. It painted a picture of systemic harassment based on disability status. The letter demanded $5,000 in compensation for legal fees and emotional distress, plus immediate withdrawal of all fines and threats. It gave them 10 days to respond before we filed the HUD complaint and pursued civil litigation. The response was fast and decisive. Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from someone identifying himself as the HOA board secretary. His voice was shaking as he asked if we could arrange a meeting to discuss a resolution. Thursday morning, all 7 board members showed up at Attorney Johnson's office. Karen wasn't with them. The meeting lasted less than an hour. The board had done their homework overnight and realized exactly how deep a hole they'd dug for themselves. Not only were we clearly outside their jurisdiction, but Karen had been acting without board approval for most of her harassment campaign. They agreed to withdraw all fines immediately. They fired the security company and promised no further monitoring of our property. They provided a written letter of apology acknowledging their mistake and our right to make reasonable accommodations. Most importantly, they cut us a check for $5,000 to cover our legal fees and compensate for the harassment. The board secretary also mentioned that Karen had submitted her resignation effective immediately. Apparently, when the board realized she'd exposed them to a potential federal lawsuit by targeting a disability accommodation, they made it clear her options were resign or be removed. I asked Attorney Johnson what would happen to her. Probably nothing serious, he said, but she'll have this on her record if she ever tries to get involved with another HOA. And the other board members learned a very expensive lesson about due diligence. Friday afternoon, I was working in my garage when I saw a familiar golf cart coming down the street. For a second, I thought Karen was making one last power play. But it was actually the board secretary, and he was delivering something to my mailbox. The envelope contained a formal letter on official HOA letterhead. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that our property had never been and would never be subject to Willows Community Association authority. It also included a commitment that no future board would attempt to assert jurisdiction over our house. As a final touch, they'd included a list of all properties that were actually within HOA boundaries, with a note that our address was specifically excluded as an outlot. That weekend, I decided to have a little fun with the whole situation. I went to a local sign shop and had them make a small neon sign for our front window. Nothing obnoxious, just a subtle blue glow with the words, "Not a member," in clean, modern lettering. It wasn't visible from inside the gated community, but anyone driving down our street would see it, including any future HOA board members who might get ideas about expanding their territory. My wife thought it was petty, but she was smiling when she said it. The security company also sent us a formal apology for the misunderstanding about their authority to monitor our property. Apparently, they'd been hired under false pretenses and never realized they were essentially stalking innocent homeowners on behalf of an organization with no legal standing. 2 weeks later, I ran into my elderly neighbor while checking the mail. She was grinning from ear to ear. "I heard about what happened with the HOA people," she said. "Word is, Karen tried to pull the same stunt with 2 other houses on this block. Both of them are calling lawyers now." It turned out our case had opened floodgates. Once people realized the HOA had been operating outside their legal boundaries, several other homeowners started fighting back against years of invalid fines and bogus violations. "Best part is," my neighbor continued, "the HOA's insurance company is furious. Apparently, Karen never told them she was trying to expand their territory without proper annexation procedures. Now they're refusing to cover any of the legal costs. The whole situation taught me an important lesson about standing up to bullies, even when they have official-sounding titles and fancy letterhead. Karen was betting that we'd just pay the fines rather than fight back. She never expected someone to actually check the property records and call her bluff. More importantly, it reinforced something I already knew about protecting people with disabilities. The Fair Housing Act exists for a reason, and there are serious consequences for anyone who tries to interfere with reasonable accommodations. Our ramp is still there, still shining in the afternoon sun, still providing the freedom and independence my wife deserves. The little blue sign in our window serves as a constant reminder that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And every time I see that golf cart patrol driving around inside the gated community, I can't help but smile. They learned an expensive lesson about knowing their boundaries. Literally. The whole experience also made me appreciate our attorney's approach. Instead of just telling the HOA they were wrong, he made sure there would be consequences for their harassment. The $5,000 settlement wasn't just about our legal fees, it was a message to every future board member that targeting disability accommodations comes with a price tag. 6 months later, I heard through neighborhood gossip that the Willows had hired a new property management company. One of their first actions was conducting a comprehensive boundary survey to make sure they knew exactly which properties were and weren't under their jurisdiction. Apparently, our case had scared them enough that they were taking no chances with future overreach. The new management company also implemented mandatory training for all board members on Fair Housing Act compliance and the legal limits of HOA authority. I never saw Karen again after that week of harassment, but I heard she moved to another state. Whether that was voluntary or whether the stress of multiple lawsuits convinced her to relocate, I don't know. What I do know is that the neighborhood has been a lot quieter since she left. The security guard who spent 3 days watching our house actually stopped by a few months later to apologize in person. He said he'd quit the security company after realizing how they'd misrepresented the situation to him. Apparently, they'd told him we were dangerous squatters or something equally ridiculous. "I should have asked more questions," he said. "That whole situation didn't sit right with me from the beginning." I appreciated his honesty and told him no hard feelings. He was just doing his job based on the information he'd been given. The experience also connected us with other homeowners in the area who'd had similar problems with HOA overreach. It turned out there was a whole network of people who'd been quietly dealing with invalid fines and bogus violations for years. Some of them had paid hundreds or even thousands of dollars in fines they never legally owed just to avoid the hassle of fighting. Others had modified their properties unnecessarily, spending money on changes to comply with rules that didn't actually apply to them. Our successful pushback inspired several of them to demand refunds and documentation of the HOA's authority over their properties. Most of them got their money back without having to hire lawyers, once the board realized the precedent our case had set. There's something deeply satisfying about turning the tables on a bully who's been getting away with their behavior for years. Karen had probably been intimidating homeowners throughout the neighborhood, counting on people's reluctance to fight official-sounding demands. But she picked the wrong target when she went after our disability accommodation. Federal laws protecting people with disabilities have serious teeth, and violating them can result in consequences far beyond anything a small-time HOA tyrant is prepared to handle. The whole experience reinforced my belief in keeping detailed records of everything. If I hadn't saved every permit, every receipt, every piece of correspondence, and every threatening notice, building a legal case would have been much harder. Documentation turned out to be the difference between a he-said, she-said dispute and a clear-cut case of harassment and federal law violations. Looking back, I'm glad we didn't just ignore the initial violation notice or quietly paint the ramp beige to make the problem go away. Sometimes standing up to bullies requires more effort than giving in, but the long-term benefits extend far beyond just your own situation. Our case helped protect other homeowners from similar harassment and established clear boundaries that should prevent future board members from making the same mistakes. It also ensured that anyone considering similar disability accommodations in the area wouldn't have to deal with the same kind of intimidation we faced. The $5,000 settlement was nice, but the real victory was knowing that Karen's replacement would think twice before targeting anyone's reasonable accommodations. Federal laws exist to protect vulnerable people from exactly this kind of discrimination, and enforcing those laws sends a message that extends far beyond individual cases. I still get a kick out of that little blue sign in our window. It's become something of a conversation starter when neighbors stop by. Everyone wants to hear the story of how we took on the HOA and won. But more than anything, I'm grateful that my wife can come and go from our house with dignity and independence. That ramp represents everything this fight was really about. Not property values or neighborhood aesthetics, but basic human rights and the freedom to live safely in your own home. And if anyone ever tries to take that away from us again, well, I've got Attorney Johnson on speed dial and a file cabinet full of documentation. Sometimes the best way to prevent future problems is making sure the first problem gets solved so thoroughly that nobody wants to risk a repeat performance. The whole experience taught me that standing up to institutional bullying isn't just about your own situation. It's about setting precedents that protect other people who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. Every Karen who gets shut down properly is one less Karen terrorizing other innocent homeowners, and every successful case builds a legal framework that makes it easier for future victims to get justice. 6 months later, our ramp is still serving its purpose beautifully. My wife has regained her independence and confidence. The neighborhood is peaceful, the HOA knows their boundaries, and I still smile every time I see that blue glow in our window after dark. Mission accomplished. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in retail. I just stock shelves. 3 or 4 people from corporate were with the store director and all ETLs touring the store, and they were in the middle of the main backroom walkway. I backstocked and had trash on my U-boat. It's a lot of styrofoam because I was doing lamps and candles. They were completely in my way. I was pushing the U-boat from behind because technically we are only allowed to push vehicles. We are not allowed to pull them from the front, and I was going to follow every rule while we had the visit going on. As I move past them, the highest-ranking one stops me. "Excuse me, can you do me a favor? Can you grab the middle of the vehicle and walk side by side it so you can see?" Then I step out to the side and I look at my vehicle and look back at him. How? How can I grab it from the side? There is not a middle shelf on this U-boat. And he stepped over to actually look at my vehicle for once and was like, "Well, would you look at that? It looks like you're missing a few shelves there." So then I'm like, "Okay, so how do you want me to do this then?" And then he told me to grab the top part of the inside of the vehicle. I don't know, it was weird and confusing, and after I did it, I confirmed with him that it is what he wants me to actually do, and he's like, "Yep, just like that." I have a picture of the vehicle and a drawn stick figure for reference, but it won't let me post it. I posted this on another subreddit, so if you want to see it, you can see it on my account. I take a few steps forward, and then the back of it spins out of control and slams into a flatbed, and then everything files off onto the ground. All of my trash is just everywhere. I immediately just start picking everything up, and he is like, "I am sorry." And he helps me pick up my trash, and I said, "Yeah, I guess the back room is a little cramped right now because of inventory prep. Guys like you literally cannot fit next to a vehicle the way he is saying it is packed back there, LOL. So anyway, I thought this was absolutely hilarious because I proved a corporate guy wrong literally to his face, just by following his directions. I met with my ETL afterwards, and she said she also thought that it was hilarious, and she said that the guy talked about how he's super embarrassed now and he felt bad for me. By the way, after all my trash was picked up, I then just pulled the U-boat from the front like a normal person, and he never said anything to me about it. One of my coworkers said that I should have just kept doing it the way he told me and repeatedly lose my trash until he would tell me to not do it that way anymore. I wish I would have. The next one is an entitled people story. Well, this just happened and I feel like I need some passengers with me on this crazy train. Names and minor details change to protect privacy. I'm an American female in my 30s and work 2 jobs, one being housekeeping. Sometimes I work both on the same days. Example being 1 or 2 days a week, I'll wake up at 5 a.m. to be at my other job, finish around noon, and immediately proceed to my 2 clients for housekeeping, and be home between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. So I'll have spent well over half the day working and commuting. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, some days are a struggle. What job isn't? But I do what I have to do to keep my kitchen and my bills paid in full and on time. I actually like housekeeping as it keeps me busy, active, I don't feel the days dragging, and I really enjoy seeing the fruits of my labor when it's all done. My clients are great and always assure me how much they appreciate my work and attention to detail. Clients designate a day for me to come over once a week, bi-weekly, or monthly. This is all focused on the main company I work for since they give me consistent work. My schedule is often packed, but I'm pretty flexible when necessary and understand life throws the occasional crap at the occasional fan and people have to reschedule a clean or cancel until further notice. Totally fine, I'm quite accommodating. Now then, I've cleaned for this one client, let's call her Susan, once a week for almost a year. She's younger than me, works from home, and has 3 timid but adorably lovable cats. At the beginning, she asked I clean the litter box tumbler, one of those rotating ones that separates the leavings from the litter, when I visit and replace the litter, and said she'd tip whenever I did. Most housekeeping businesses don't want us doing litter boxes for obvious reasons, but I have the proper PPE and bleach-free solutions to do it, so I agreed. Took a while as it's heavy, but I got the hang of it. Susan was cool, and we got along very well. Today, my entire body is sore as hell, and my ankle made it clear any weight put on it was met with corporal punishment, possible tendon damage. I'll see a specialist soon. This was to be one of my 12-plus hour work days, but my body has shut down due to maintenance. I called out of my morning job yesterday. I knew I wouldn't be able to work, let alone drive, in this condition, and told my cleaning one to reschedule my 2 regular clients today for any open slots I have next week. I apologize for the trouble, but needed to rest to be at my A game again. Let's say Dina, one of the co-owners, texted back saying no prob and to get a good rest. She was very understanding because the huge job I underwent yesterday and the day before took a rough toll on me physically. Keep up, guys, as this will be revisited soon. After a couple hours and a subpar nap, Dinah texts me the following. Dina, Susan decided to cancel services. You'll notice it updated on your schedule. Me, okay. She mentioned in the past she was going to move out in a couple months. Guess she found a place. Dina, actually she canceled because you missed today. She was being ridiculous. Me, oh. Staring at phone, confused as how this escalated Dina. This was our response. Dina, hey Susan, this is Dina, the owner of cleaning company. I pulled up our records. My name has made it out 46 weeks in a row without missing a single visit. Not one. We've also accommodated multiple requests from you to shift dates and times, and we've done so to the best of our ability. To characterize one cancellation due to a physical ailment as a pattern of last-minute cancellations isn't accurate, and it's not fair to someone who has shown up for you every single week for almost a whole year. We wish you the best moving forward. Well, damn, this surprised the hell out of me. Susan knows I work 2 jobs and how hard I work. Even my co-workers and managers know I don't miss work unless I have a damn good reason. Some often text me asking if I'm okay because they're genuinely worried about me. So, for Susan to go from 0 to 100 like that, not gonna lie, really stings as I did like her as a client and as a person. Can't be friends with everyone, not that I want to, but I like a good rapport with my clients. If someone came to do a service for me every week to my house, my safest space, folding my laundered intimates and things, I'd want to be reasonably comfortable with them too. Still with me? Cool. Grab a cookie and a drink. Now what exactly was the reason I missed 3 jobs today, you're wondering? Well, your patience is about to be rewarded. Other housekeepers had an emergency and couldn't do it. Again, crap meat fan. It was a deep clean for a big Airbnb. I took the job, loaded my inventory like I was ready for the final boss, and was there 2 days later. We often go into these jobs blind, so it's best to be over-prepared than under for whatever we might encounter. After I finished my usual Wednesday client, 3-hour clean, easy, I was off to the Airbnb. What I was not prepared for was this being a 3-story home, looks like some reno was done, with 4 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms, and 37 steps going to the 2nd and 3rd floor. Yeah, bet your supple ass I counted them. The beds were all king-sized and needed the old sheets washed and the new ones put on. Also, there was no washer and dryer installed yet, so I had to take all the bedding to the home next door, the client owned both, go to the 2nd floor to do laundry there, keep a timer to stay on top of it. Yeah, it was a lot to put it very mildly. Usually we can only work in the time allotted on the app, and I finished in the 7.5 hours later given. I limp home before 9 p.m., and my boyfriend helps me get settled as my driving ankle, which has been giving me issues on and off the past several months, is full-blown donezo. I had to organize the 140 before and after photos I took, but missed some as my phone died before finished. I fell asleep before I could upload them. Okay, this is longer than I thought, so I'll wrap this up. Yesterday was my day off, and my body rebelled when I woke up. Barely slept as the pain woke me every time I tried to turn over. Dina texted me that afternoon to go back and finish. I told her I was in quite a state after the previous day, but she said it had to be done before the photographer came, and she tried to get someone else so I could rest. Long story short, my boyfriend, a king among kings, offered to help me. Dina okayed it, and I drove us there. I wanted to obliterate the stairs when I saw them again. Luckily, I pushed through and we finished in less than 4 hours thanks to my man encouraging me the whole time. He drove us home as my ankle was not having it, even with the brace on. I felt bad having to miss 3 jobs and 3 additions to my paycheck, but I don't feel bad why. It sucks to lose a client because of the limitations of my squishy human body, but when Dina mentioned that Susan called my skipping today a pattern of cancellations when there's irrefutable proof to the contrary, gotta say, really irks me. It reminded me of that Beyoncé song, Yes, if you know you know, where she sings about how she always says yes to her man when he asks something. Part of the chorus goes, "The first time I said no, it's like I never said yes." That sums it up perfectly. Susan got 99 cleanings and couldn't not have one. The next one is an entitled people story. My grandmother's antique vase had been in our family for generations. It was a beautiful piece of art that held a great deal of sentimental value to me. After my grandmother passed away, I inherited the vase and kept it on display in my living room, where it always caught the eye of visitors. I cherished it and made sure to take great care of it. One day, while I was at work, my neighbor called me to inform me that there was a man lurking around my house. I immediately rushed home, but by the time I got there, the man was gone. Nothing seemed to be missing, so I shrugged it off as a potential robbery attempt and didn't think much of it. A few weeks later, I noticed that my grandmother's vase was missing. My heart sank. This vase was priceless to me, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing it forever. I searched every inch of my house, but it was nowhere to be found. I even checked with my family members to see if anyone had borrowed it, but they all denied taking it. I called the police and reported the theft, but they told me that without any evidence or leads, there was not much they could do. I was devastated and felt violated. I posted about the stolen vase on social media and reached out to antique dealers and pawn shops in the area, hoping to find any leads on its whereabouts. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I had given up hope of ever finding my precious heirloom. That is until one day, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a note that read, "I'm sorry for taking your vase. It was a mistake. Please forgive me." Along with the note was the vase, unharmed and returned to its rightful place. I was overjoyed, but I still couldn't help but wonder who had taken it and why. I decided to do some digging and found out that my neighbor's son had been struggling with a drug addiction and had stolen the vase to sell it for some quick cash. He had since gone to rehab and was on the road to recovery. I was relieved that the vase had been returned, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal. My neighbor had known about her son's addiction and had not informed me. I couldn't trust her anymore. I decided to confront her about it and have an honest conversation about the situation. During our conversation, she revealed that her son had not only taken the vase, but had also been responsible for several other break-ins in the neighborhood. She had been covering for him, hoping to protect him from getting into even more trouble. I was shocked and appalled by this revelation. I urged her to encourage her son to turn himself in and seek help for his addiction. Weeks passed by without any news, but then I received a call from the police. They had caught the thief who had broken into my house and stole my vase. It turned out to be a professional thief who had been operating in the area for a long time. They had finally caught him, and he had given up the locations of all the stolen items he had taken. The police informed me that they had recovered not only my vase, but also several other items that had been stolen from my neighbors. It was a huge relief for all of us, and we were grateful for the police's efforts in catching the thief. As for my neighbor's son, he eventually turned himself in and sought help for his addiction. He went through a difficult but successful rehab program and managed to turn his life around. He even reached out to me to apologize personally for what he had done and to thank me for being a catalyst in his recovery. The incident brought us closer together, and we formed a bond based on mutual respect and understanding. I learned to forgive and be more empathetic, and my neighbor learned to trust and communicate more openly with me. Months went by, and life returned to normal. My grandmother's vase continued to hold a special place in my home, and I made sure to take extra precautions to protect it. I installed a security system, reinforced the doors and windows, and even got a guard dog. Then, one day, I received another unexpected package in the mail. This time, it was a letter from an unknown sender. The letter read, "I am sorry for stealing your vase. I was in a dark place in my life, and I made a terrible mistake. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted to make things right. Enclosed, you'll find the amount of money I received for selling it. I hope this helps to make amends." I was shocked by the letter. I had never expected to hear from the thief again, let alone receive the money back. I was torn between accepting the money and donating it to charity or returning it to the thief with a note of forgiveness. After much contemplation, I decided to write back to the thief, thanking them for their gesture and letting them know that I forgave them. I also enclosed a note, telling them to keep the money and use it to start fresh and make positive changes in their life. A few weeks later, I received a final note from the thief, expressing their gratitude for my forgiveness and promising to make amends by volunteering at a local rehab center. It was a touching and unexpected ending to a story that had started with heartbreak and betrayal. The incident had taught me the value of forgiveness and understanding, and how even the darkest moments in life could lead to positive changes and growth. I learned that people make mistakes, and it's important to give them a chance to make amends and turn their life around. As for the vase, it remained a constant reminder to me of the power of forgiveness and the importance of protecting the things we hold most dear. It was a symbol of my grandmother's love and legacy, and I was grateful for the journey it had taken me on. The next one is an entitled people story. I had lived in a beautiful house in a HOA neighborhood with my husband Frank and our daughter Georgia for almost 10 years. Our daughter was disabled, and we had modified our home to make it more accessible for her. We had a wheelchair ramp and a large handicap-accessible van parked in our driveway, which we needed for our daughter's daily life. For years, we had no issues with the HOA rules. We kept our property in good condition, and we respected our neighbors. However, in the last 6 months or so, there had been some changes to policies in the neighborhood's HOA. They had decided that they did not want any of the residents to park their vehicles in their driveways. When we first learned of this change, we were surprised and we thought it was ridiculous. Why couldn't we park our van in our driveway? We had a 2-car garage like the rest of the neighborhood, but with my husband's truck and the way that we had to get in and out of the van, it was impossible to keep it in the garage and get the lift gate down without hitting the other vehicle. On top of that, we also had a wheelchair ramp in the garage that took up too much room, so we had always kept it in the driveway. We were not the only family being affected by this new policy. Dozens of other homes in our neighborhood also parked their vehicles in their driveways. We thought the new policy was unfair and discriminatory, but we decided to follow it, hoping it would soon change. At first, we received letters warning us about the new policy, but we thought it was just a formality. We did not take it seriously because we thought the HOA would see how the new policy was affecting residents and would eventually change it. We continued parking our van in our driveway, just like many other residents in the neighborhood. However, we soon started receiving daily letters from the HOA, threatening to fine us for parking in our driveway. We were shocked and outraged that they would be so strict about such a trivial issue. Then one day, we received a letter stating that our van in particular was an eyesore and devalued the neighborhood, especially because we lived near the front. We were hurt and frustrated. Other homeowners were still leaving their vehicles out, so why were they focusing on our van specifically? Because it was big and ugly, according to them. We did not know what to do. We could not remove the wheelchair ramp without making it difficult for our daughter to move around, but we also could not afford the daily fines. We decided to reach out to friends and neighbors for advice. They suggested that we attend the next HOA board meeting and explain our situation to them. Maybe they would see some sense and have kindness towards us. We went to the meeting, but we were ignored and treated with disrespect. We were shocked by how the board members acted. They ignored us and acted like we did not matter. We felt like we were being discriminated against because of our daughter's disability. We were angry and frustrated, and we decided to take action. We hired a disability lawyer, researched the Fair Housing Act and other laws against discrimination for physical disabilities, and tried to gather signatures from our neighbors to dispute the change in parking rules. The HOA board did not respond to our requests, and they continued to threaten us with fines. One day, we woke up to find that our van was gone. It had been towed, and there was a note on our front door stating that we had to pay a fine to get it back. We and my husband and I decided to take the matter into our own hands and filed a complaint against the HOA with the state's Attorney General's office. We also reached out to local news outlets to bring attention to the situation and shed light on the discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Within a few weeks, the Attorney General's office opened an investigation into the HOA's discriminatory policies and practices. The news outlets also picked up the story, and it gained national attention. Soon, we were receiving support from individuals and organizations all over the country who were outraged by what had happened to us. The pressure on the HOA and its board members continued to mount, and they were forced to take action. In a public statement, the board members apologized for their discriminatory actions and announced that they would be revising their policies to ensure that individuals with disabilities were not unfairly targeted or discriminated against. They also promised to work with us to ensure that our family's needs were met and that we could park our van in our own driveway without fear of reprisal. Although we were grateful for the apology and the change in policy, we knew that there was still work to be done. We continued to work with the Attorney General's office to ensure that the HOA followed through on its promises and that individuals with disabilities were treated fairly and with respect. A few months later, we received a surprising letter from the HOA. They had decided to offer us a seat on the board of directors in recognition of our advocacy and commitment to improving the lives of individuals with disabilities. We were both shocked and honored and accepted the offer. As board members, we worked hard to ensure that the HOA followed through on its promises, and that individuals with disabilities were treated fairly and with respect. We also worked to implement new policies and practices that would make our neighborhood more accessible and welcoming to individuals with disabilities. 1 year later, we received another letter from the HOA. This time, it was an invitation to a ceremony where they planned to unveil a new memorial to individuals with disabilities. The memorial was a beautiful sculpture that depicted a wheelchair and a ramp, and it was inscribed with a quote from the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ceremony was attended by members of the community, including representatives from local disability rights organizations. It was a beautiful and emotional event, and it felt like a turning point for our neighborhood. From that day forward, our neighborhood became a more inclusive and welcoming place for individuals with disabilities. Looking back on our experience, we knew that it was a difficult and painful time for our family, but it was also a time of growth and change. We had the opportunity to advocate for ourselves and others, and we were able to make a real difference in our community. We were grateful for the support we received from so many people and organizations, and we were proud of what we had accomplished together. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to work at a high-end fashion boutique which catered to a very specific clientele. The dress code was strict, and every employee was expected to look their best. It was a job I enjoyed, and I took pride in my appearance. However, there was an issue that began to arise at the store. Customers would occasionally find loose hairs on their clothing and complain to management. And every time this happened, my boss would immediately turn to me and accuse me of being the culprit, despite the fact that my hair was always secured in a tight bun. I found myself growing increasingly frustrated and insulted at being the constant scapegoat. And to make matters worse, I was the only blonde employee, making me an easy target for customers looking to place blame. After several months of this, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew that there was no way I was responsible for every hair found on a customer's clothing. I decided to dye my hair a bright pink color, which was a bold move. but it would prove that the hairs found on clothing couldn't be mine. On the day of the dye job, I was feeling both excited and nervous. I'd never made such a dramatic change to my appearance before, and I knew it would be noticed. But I was also feeling empowered. I knew I was doing the right thing and standing up for myself. Over the next few days, my new hair color was the talk of the store. Customers commented on it and my colleagues told me they loved it. But the real test came when a customer found a hair on her clothing once again. This time, however, things were different. My boss immediately turned to me with accusatory eyes, but I calmly reminded him that my hair was now pink, and the hair couldn't have been mine. He stared at me in disbelief. But after a brief investigation, it was determined that the hair belonged to a customer who had previously tried on the clothing. My boss apologized to me for his behavior and promised to investigate any future complaints before placing blame on any particular employee. From that point on, my workplace environment became more respectful and positive, and I felt proud of myself for standing up for myself and making a positive change. However, a few months after this incident, there was another situation that threatened to derail the progress that had been made. A customer, who had been disgruntled with the store's return policy, took out her anger on me by complaining to my boss that I had been rude and unhelpful to her. My boss, who had previously been supportive of me, seemed to be taking the customer's side without hearing my perspective. I was angry and frustrated, feeling as if all of my hard work in improving the workplace culture was being undone. But I didn't give up. I decided to sit down with my boss and explain the situation from my point of view. I spoke calmly and respectfully, explaining what had happened and why I had acted the way I did. After hearing me out, my boss apologized and said he would take my side moving forward. From that point on, my boss began to value my opinions and insights more than before. I felt empowered and respected in my workplace, and I knew that my decision to dye my hair pink had ultimately led to a better work environment for everyone. Update. It's been several years since the hair incident, and I've since moved on from that job. But the experience taught me a valuable lesson, to always stand up for myself and not be afraid to make bold moves to prove my worth. I've taken that lesson with me throughout my career and have been successful in every job I've had since. And as for my hair, I've experimented with many different colors since then, but I always have a special place in my heart for the bold pink that helped me prove my point. I've also stayed in touch with some of my former colleagues, and I've heard that my boss at the fashion boutique has continued to prioritize fairness and respect in the workplace. It makes me happy to know that my actions had a lasting impact on the culture of the store, even after I left. Looking back on that time, I'm proud of the courage I showed in standing up for myself and making a change. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, but I knew that I couldn't continue to let others blame me for something that wasn't my fault. Since then, I've become more confident in my abilities and more vocal about my needs and expectations in both my personal and professional life. I've learned that sometimes making a bold move is necessary to get the respect and recognition we deserve. And who knows, maybe someday I'll dye my hair pink again, just for fun. But no matter what, I'll always remember that first time, and how it helped me prove a point and make a positive change in the world around me. The last one is an entitled people story. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was just 4 years old. It was a shock to my parents and me, but we learned to manage it over the years. I had to take insulin injections multiple times a day, and my parents had to monitor my blood sugar levels constantly. But as I grew up, I became more independent and learned to manage my condition on my own. When I was in middle school, I started using a continuous glucose monitor and an insulin pump. The pump was a lifesaver for me as it delivered insulin to my body automatically and helped me avoid the constant injections. But it also had a little tube that connected the pump to my body, which could be a bit noisy at times. I had an individualized education program, IEP, in place, which meant that all my teachers were informed about my condition and the accommodations I needed in the classroom. They were told that I might need to access my pump during class and that it might make some noise. But they were also told that I would do so discreetly and only when necessary. However, one of my teachers was not very understanding. She was known for her strict and unreasonable behavior, and she had a particular hatred for technology. She was constantly on the lookout for any student who might be using a device during her class, and she would take extreme measures to enforce her rules. One day she caught me fidgeting with my pump in class. It was making some noise, and she assumed that it was a device that I wasn't supposed to have. Without even asking me what it was, she walked up to me and snatched it out of my pocket. And before I could even protest, she cut the tube with a pair of scissors. I was shocked and scared. My pump was a lifesaver for me, and I depended on it to keep me alive. I tried to explain to the teacher that it was my insulin pump, but she refused to listen. She accused me of disobeying her rules and being disrespectful, and to add insult to injury, she made me call my mother to bring a replacement infusion set, which took hours. When my mother arrived, she was furious. She demanded to speak to the teacher and the principal, and she made it clear that she would not tolerate such behavior. The teacher tried to apologize, but my mother was not satisfied. She wanted the school to take strict action against the teacher and ensure that no student would face such discrimination again. In the end, the school authorities had to hold a meeting with us and apologize for the incident. They promised to provide more training to the teachers about accommodating students with disabilities. But my mother was not satisfied. She wanted the teacher to be fired and sued the school for endangering my life. It was a long and tiring process, but we eventually got justice. The teacher was fired and the school had to pay a hefty sum as compensation. And to make sure that such incidents never happen again, my mother worked with the school to develop a policy for accommodating students with disabilities. The policy was adopted by the school district, and it became a model for other schools in the state. Years later, I graduated from college and started my own business. I still use an insulin pump, but I have never faced such discrimination again. And I'm proud to say that my mother's advocacy work has helped many other students with disabilities get the accommodations they need in the classroom. However, the incident had a long-lasting impact on me. I became fearful of facing discrimination in other areas of my life, and I struggled with anxiety and depression. It was not until I went to therapy and learned to manage my mental health that I was able to move on from the incident. But then something unexpected happened. Years after the incident, I received a letter from the teacher who had cut my insulin pump tube. She apologized for her actions and expressed regret for the pain she had caused me and my family. She explained that she had been going through a difficult time in her personal life and that she had taken out her frustrations on me. At first, I was hesitant to accept her apology. I still felt angry and hurt by what she had done to me. But as I read her letter again, I realized that she was genuinely remorseful and that she had taken steps to educate herself about diabetes and other disabilities. She had attended workshops and seminars and had become an advocate for students with disabilities in her new school. I decided to meet with her and hear her out. We had a long and emotional conversation, and she apologized again for her actions. But this time, I could see that she was sincere, and I could feel the weight of her remorse. We parted ways on good terms, and I felt a sense of closure and healing. In the years that followed, I became an advocate for students with disabilities myself. I volunteered at local schools and worked with organizations that advocated for disability rights. And I discovered that my experience had given me a unique perspective on the struggles of others. And then one day I received an invitation to speak at a conference on disability rights. I was nervous but excited to share my story and inspire others. And as I spoke about my experience, I realized that my story had the power to change hearts and minds. After the conference, a woman approached me and told me that she had been inspired by my story. She was a teacher herself, and she had never thought much about accommodating students with disabilities. But after hearing my story, she realized that she had a responsibility to do better. She thanked me for opening her eyes and promised to advocate for students with disabilities in her classroom. It was a powerful moment for me, and it reminded me that my experience had the power to make a difference. And as I continue to advocate for disability rights, I hope that my story will inspire others to do the same. The next one is an entitled people story.
To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city. Let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and two busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood, and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her AM was the priestess. In our neighborhood, she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade, and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them and still wish them the best. But the guy who bought the house entered the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently, when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years, and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the first of every month. No partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month, or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon, and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjo Land. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short 1 month, and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjo Land to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call-out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter. We didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple of extra days, but it was evident he really, really wanted us out. Possibly because the work trucks were now 1 street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior. Otherwise, she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there, and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look at the house over, and any time a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by the time he did get the news, he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could, and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. The next one is an entitled people story. Hey there, my name is Sarah, and I have a story to tell about my neighbor Jessica. I live in a suburban neighborhood in the northeastern United States. It's a nice area with well-kept houses and friendly neighbors. My husband and I have lived here for over a decade, and we've always gotten along well with everyone on our block. A few years ago, we decided to add an in-ground swimming pool to our backyard. We had always wanted one, and we finally had the money to make it happen. We hired a reputable pool company and started the construction process. At first, everything was going smoothly. The construction workers were friendly and professional, and they were making great progress on the pool. We were excited to finally have a place to relax and cool off during the hot summer months. But then, things started to go wrong. One day, we came home to find that someone had dumped a ton of dirt and debris into the pool. It was a huge mess, and we had no idea how it had happened. We suspected that someone had deliberately sabotaged our pool, but we didn't know who or why. We decided to clean up the mess and move forward with the pool construction, but we were on high alert for any other signs of sabotage. A few days later, we noticed that our neighbor Jessica had been acting strangely. She would glare at us whenever we were outside and would make snide comments under her breath. We had always been friendly with Jessica, so we didn't know why she was suddenly acting this way. One afternoon, while my husband and I were sitting outside enjoying the sun, Jessica stormed over to our yard and started yelling at us. She accused us of putting the pool on her property and demanded that we take it down immediately. We were shocked and confused. We had made sure to follow all the necessary regulations and had the property surveyed before starting the construction. We knew that the pool was on our property, not hers. But Jessica was relentless. She kept insisting that the pool was on her property and threatened to take legal action if we didn't remove it. We tried to reason with her and show her the property survey, but she wouldn't listen. Finally, we decided to hire a lawyer to help us deal with the situation. We didn't want to escalate things, but we also didn't want to be bullied out of having our dream pool. After a few weeks of back and forth with Jessica and her lawyer, it was determined that the pool was indeed on our property. We were relieved, but also frustrated that we had to go through all this trouble to prove something that was so obvious. The pool construction was completed without any further incidents, and we were finally able to enjoy it. We invited our neighbors over for a pool party, and everyone had a great time. But we still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Jessica. A few weeks later, we came home from a weekend trip to find that someone had poured a ton of chemicals into our pool. The water was bright green and smelled terrible. We immediately called the pool company, and they determined that the chemicals were toxic and had caused significant damage to the pool. We knew that it had to be Jessica. She was the only one who had been acting strange and hostile towards us, and this was too much of a coincidence. We called the police and reported the incident, but there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. We were devastated. We had spent so much money and time on the pool, and now it was completely ruined. We decided to take legal action against Jessica, but we knew that it would be a long and difficult process. Eventually, after months of legal battles, we were able to prove that Jessica had indeed sabotaged our pool. She was ordered to pay for the damages and was also fined for trespassing and vandalism. We were relieved that justice had been served, but we were also saddened by the fact that our relationship with our once friendly neighbor had deteriorated so much. But the story doesn't end there. About a year after the incident, we received a letter in the mail from Jessica. In the letter, she apologized for her behavior and explained that she had been going through a difficult time in her life. She had been struggling with depression and anxiety, and had become convinced that we were out to get her. She had never intended to cause us harm, but her mental state had clouded her judgment. We were surprised by the letter, but also touched by Jessica's vulnerability and honesty. We decided to meet with her and hear her out. We had no intention of becoming friends with her again, but we wanted to give her a chance to explain herself and make amends. We met with Jessica at a local coffee shop, and she opened up to us about her struggles. We listened and offered support and encouragement. It was a difficult conversation, but also a healing one. In the end, we were able to forgive Jessica for what she had done. We knew that mental illness can be a powerful force, and that it can cause people to do things they wouldn't normally do. We also knew that we didn't want to hold on to anger and resentment. Today, Jessica and her family have moved away from our neighborhood, but we still keep in touch with her. She has gotten the help she needed for her mental health issues and is doing much better. We're glad that we were able to find a way to move past the hurt and come out stronger as a community. The experience taught us a lot about forgiveness and empathy, and we're grateful for that lesson. We also installed even more security measures to protect our property just in case. But we know that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past and focus on the present. The next one is a petty revenge story. This may be the pettiest thing I have ever done in my life. I'm a pretty petty person and I also believe in malicious compliance, but this takes the cake. So, I bought a condo in a building in a large city in the US about 2.5 years ago. The building has a homeowners association, HOA, that we all pay into monthly. Since I've lived here, the building has rapidly deteriorated, and we have all hired an attorney for a class action style lawsuit. I'm talking broken elevators, broken rooftop AC units. The pool was empty for 4 months during the summer, etc. The people in the building are great though, and we are a friendly bunch. Last year, I took the HOA to small claims court because they failed to provide financial documents that show us how our fees are being spent. As this is a legal requirement for all HOAs in my state, I won the case and was awarded the $30 filing fee plus $1 symbolic. I sued for documents, not money. The fact that they can't provide the docs as they are legally required to do is a separate issue among others, including possible wrongdoing, that we've hired the attorneys for. I have asked the HOA to pay the $31 to me, and the president of the HOA wants to either meet me somewhere private to give it to me, or he wants to mail me a satisfaction of judgment form, have me sign it and mail it back to him, and then he will mail me a check. No to both. 3 days after I won the case, the HOA announced that they were going to charge us all a special assessment of about $1,000 each, and an increase in our monthly dues of 10%. In my state, a membership vote gets triggered if you charge a special assessment that brings the building more than 5% its yearly income, which means 51% of the owners must approve the assessment for it to take effect. As this dollar is about 20% of our yearly income, a vote should have taken place. When we asked about this vote, the HOA said that it was being made under an emergency clause, which means that the membership vote doesn't have to take place. The emergency? Fixing the elevator that broke on December 24th, 2021. The spirit of the emergency clause is for things like fire, earthquake, flood, etc., not a broken elevator that has been broken for a year already. When there was understandable pushback, the HOA sent out a little email stating that anyone who didn't pay the assessment would have a lien put on their unit. The liens came down yesterday on those that couldn't pay $1,000 on short notice. Our attorneys told us that even though the money is in dispute, we still have to pay it, and I did pay mine, but we also have a lot of retirees/lower income people in the building. The HOA president's house is currently on the market for $20,000. I just got back from the courthouse where I filed a $31 lien against it for $140, clouding its title. It's a matter of principle, not money. Now the title can't change hands until he pays me my $31, and I am perfectly within my rights to collect on a judgment owed. The next one is an entitled people story. A couple of years ago, my DH and I bought a house from the city council. We had seen it, loved everything about it and the neighborhood. Inspection showed that everything, apart from the central heating boiler, was in good order. We still needed to replace the central heating boiler. We also renovated the bathroom and stairs, and we placed a new kitchen. Between then and now, we have invested money in our home. Among other things, we placed solar panels, renovated the front and back garden, and renovated our downstairs toilet. For reference, we have lived here for around 6 years now, and we have no intention of moving. Apart from the fact that we have put a lot of money into the house, we love the neighborhood, our neighbors, and the fact that we are close to family and friends. The way the council sold houses went as follows. The house was up for sale for 6 weeks. If you were interested, you could schedule a visit with the real estate agent, place a bid if you wanted, and then after the 6 weeks, the city council would look at all the bids and see who offered the most. 2 weeks ago, I was home when a lady rang the doorbell. She introduced herself and told me that when the house came up for sale all those years ago, she and her husband were interested. They could see the potential, but their bid was rejected. She was enthusiastic about how it looked now, from what she could see, and how beautiful the garden was, how wonderful the solar panels were and such. So I thanked her for her compliments and waited for the reason why she rang the doorbell. She told me that since they had more money saved, she and her husband wanted to know if we were interested in selling them the house. I told her that we were not interested. She started whining and gave an offer, and I told her the same. Not interested at all. More whining ensued, and she made a new offer. I kindly drew the line and said that she can offer all she wants. We love living here, and we want to enjoy our home with the family we've built in it. Then I told her that I had things to do, wished her a good day, and closed the door. I had barely turned around when she started ringing the doorbell continuously. So I opened the door and asked her what she needed to say. She told me this, almost verbatim. "You need to sell us this house. You have lived here for some years now. My husband and children deserve a nice house like this. I gave you 2 offers that are very reasonable. It's our turn now, so sell us the house. We want to live here." I told this woman that her offers were laughable. She gave 2 offers while we knew that we could ask for double the price and get that still. She lowballed. I reiterated that we were not interested and would not sell the house. I asked her to leave and closed the door again. Like before, she started ringing the doorbell like a madwoman. After trying to ignore it, I ripped open the front door and shouted in her face for her to get lost. We are not interested. Even if we were, I would not sell my house to her since she's acting like a spoiled brat. I wouldn't want my neighbors to deal with her spoiled attitude. I told her that she doesn't need to think about trying to bully us into moving and to get the duck away, or I would call the police. This time I slammed the door to get the message across. She stayed, screaming at the door that we have to sell the house to her, and walked around a bit before leaving. I did send a message in our streets group app about her. People have said to keep an eye out for her. My DH was stunned when I told him this, since this is not a normal thing in our country to do. She has been seen once or twice, but has not caused problems for us or anyone else. The next one is an entitled parent story. I work at a car dealership as a receptionist, and one of my duties is to greet customers when they enter. I am also a professional artist on the side and have been busy with some commissions lately. Since it's not busy at the dealer, I started working on my iPad mini. It's old and I'm working on upgrading, but I currently can't afford it. So I live with it, despite the battery life being really short, and I have to keep it plugged in at all times. During my lunch break, I was in the waiting area doing more work when a kid, a little girl no older than 4, came up and watched me work. This happens a lot when I draw in public, and usually the kids just ask a lot of questions. But this NG, nice girl, was very quiet and just had a look of amazement, so I let her be. Her mother, the EM in the story, was nearby at a salesman's desk working on purchasing a new car, which is a long and no doubt boring process. The salesman working with her walked away, which at my dealership, they do very often to retrieve paperwork, talk to the sales finance managers, etc. She looks over at me and her kid and asks her, "What are you looking at?" Her kid points at my screen and says, "She's painting puppies!" I was working on Twitch emotes of a streamer's dog. I sort of show my screen to EM and she then asks her kid if she wants to draw, which the girl excitedly said yes. I expected EM to pull out paper and pencils or at least ask if I can get some for her too, but she just looked at me expectantly. When I realized she was waiting for me to hand her my iPad, I said, "Oh, she can't use mine, but I can get her a notepad and pens." But apparently that wasn't good enough. She sighs and says, "Just let her draw a little bit. I'm almost done here anyway," which I knew for a fact wasn't true. They were waiting for bank approval for a loan, which can take anywhere between 5-30 minutes, and even then, they'll be here longer for finance paperwork, detailing, etc. I start to explain that this is part of my work, and she scoffs, saying I'm just doodling puppies, and it was selfish that I wouldn't let NG doodle on my device too. Poor NG was just looking at her hands, looking quite embarrassed. I then pretended my lunch was over and got up to spend the rest of my lunch at my desk. I couldn't see her behind a huge truck on display, but I could hear her grumble to NG about who knows what. Whatever, pretend like I didn't hear so I don't mess up this sale for my coworker. Sometime later, Nature called me, and I got up to use the restroom. I left my iPad on my seat so it'll stay plugged in and put a notepad over it to try to cover it up somehow. My desk is a wide crescent shape with no drawers to keep my things safe, so this was the best I could do to somewhat hide it. I was in the restroom no longer than 3 minutes, but when I got back, only my charger remained. My iPad and Apple Pencil were gone. I looked over to the lady who had her large purse suspiciously in her lap now instead of on the floor beside her chair like it was before. I was panicked because a lot of my work is on that iPad that I needed. I went to my sales manager, SM, and told him the situation. He told me he would take care of it, but to be patient for now. I went back to my desk full of anxiety and my stomach doing backflips. SM went to the desk where EM was to work out the deal. They're far enough that I can hear their voices, but not pinpoint what they're saying. But I did hear her eventually yell, "How dare you! I would never steal! Do you want to lose this sale?" I immediately got up and went over behind the lady so SM could see me, but she couldn't. He tells her he understands, but my iPad went missing and he wants to make sure no one currently in the building has it. That's when I remembered the Find My feature on all Apple products. My iPad was connected to the dealer's Wi-Fi, so I pulled out my iPhone and pressed play sound for my iPad. Her purse started dinging. She tried to play it off as if it's her ringtone, and SM stared at her as if daring her to answer it. The thing is, with the play sound feature, if I keep pressing it, it will keep pinging. I made my presence known and told her to give my iPad back. That's when she stopped playing dumb and just said, "Just let NG have it, her birthday is coming up and I can't afford a present for her since I'm getting this car." SM said he was happy to cancel the deal so she can instead buy a birthday present for her child and to return my iPad, or he'll call the police. She practically threw my iPad at me where it hit me in the gut, and took NG from the waiting area to leave. Poor thing looked at me with the most apologetic look on her face before leaving with her mother. SM might have helped me, but he's not exactly the nicest person. From now on, I'm not allowed to bring my iPad to the dealer. I have to either leave it in my car or leave it at home. Whatever. EM took my Apple Pencil with her since she left in a hurry, so I'm gonna stop by the Apple store after work to get a new one. But until then, I'm stuck with my pens and notepad.
The next one is an entitled people story.
I had lived in the same neighborhood for years, and I thought I knew all of my neighbors pretty well. However, one day, I heard a story that I just couldn't believe. A few doors down the road, there was an old couple who had lived in their house for as long as I could remember. They were kind and always had a smile on their faces, so it was a surprise when they started to get upset about something. It turns out that a new neighbor had bought the vacant lot next door to them, and they had started to build a new house on the steep hillside. This wasn't unusual in our neighborhood, but what was unusual was that the new neighbor had built their driveway partly on the old couple's property, without asking for permission. The old couple didn't know what to do. They had no idea what the legal ramifications were, and they were worried about what would happen if they took legal action against their new neighbor. They also didn't want to cause any trouble, but they knew that they couldn't just let someone walk all over them. The situation only got worse when they went to talk to the new neighbor. He was rude and dismissive, denying that the driveway crossed the property line. The old couple was understandably upset, but they didn't want to cause a scene. They tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't budge. Days turned into weeks, and construction on the new house continued. The old couple watched in dismay as the excavator dug into their property, carving out the hillside to make way for the new driveway. They knew that they had to do something, but they just didn't know what. One day, the old couple's son came to visit them. He was a friend of a neighbor I knew, and he told us about what was happening. We were all outraged by the new neighbor's behavior, and we knew that we had to help the old couple. One neighbor had a friend who was a property lawyer, so we asked her to look into the matter. It turned out that the new neighbor had indeed built his driveway on the old couple's property, and they had a legal right to demand that he remove it. The old couple didn't want to take legal action, but they knew that they had to do something to protect their property. They tried to reason with the new neighbor again, but he was still uncooperative. That's when my neighbor had an idea. He had an old pickup truck that he didn't use much anymore, and he decided to park it across the driveway, entirely on the old couple's property. The next day, when the construction crew arrived, they found that they couldn't get to the house they were building because the truck was blocking the way. The new neighbor was furious. He demanded that the truck be moved, but my neighbor stood his ground. He had permission from the owners to park there, and he wasn't going to move the truck until the property boundary dispute was resolved. The construction crew had no choice but to take the day off, and the new neighbor was left fuming. However, he eventually realized that he needed to resolve the issue if he wanted his house to be built. He ended up paying a significant sum of money to the old couple in exchange for an easement allowing the driveway to pass across the corner of their property. The old couple was grateful for the help, but they were also sad that they had to resort to such measures to protect their property. They felt like they had been wronged, and they didn't want to see anyone else go through the same thing. That's when they decided to take action. They started a neighborhood watch group, encouraging everyone to look out for each other and to report any suspicious activity. They also organized a community meeting to discuss the issue of property boundaries and the importance of respecting one another's property. At the meeting, the property lawyer who had helped the old couple gave a presentation on property law and the legal options available to homeowners. She emphasized the importance of knowing your property lines and understanding your rights as a property owner. The meeting was a success, and it brought the neighborhood together in a way that it hadn't been before. People started to look out for each other more, and there was a sense of community that hadn't existed before. As for the new neighbor, he eventually finished building his house and moved in. However, he was never fully accepted by the neighborhood. People would be polite to him, but they would also keep their distance. One day, a few months after the incident with the driveway, there was a fire in the new neighbor's house. It started in the garage and quickly spread to the rest of the house. The fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was already done. The house was a total loss. At first, people assumed it was just a tragic accident, but rumors started to circulate that the fire had been set deliberately. Some people whispered that the old couple had done it as revenge for the driveway incident. No one knows for sure what happened, but the fire was a wake-up call for the neighborhood. It reminded us all of the importance of being good neighbors and treating each other with respect. As for the old couple, they were heartbroken by the fire. They knew that they had nothing to do with it, but they still felt guilty. They had never wanted things to escalate to that point, and they wished that they could have found a peaceful solution. The community rallied around them, though, and helped them rebuild their house. People brought over food and offered to help with the repairs. The old couple was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, and they realized that they truly were a part of a caring and compassionate neighborhood. Update. It's been a few years since the incident with the driveway and the fire, and the neighborhood has changed a lot. The old couple has since passed away, but their legacy lives on. The community is still close-knit, and people still look out for each other. The new neighbor who had built his driveway without permission ended up moving away a few years ago. He never really fit in with the community, and he always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. Some people think that he was never able to shake the feeling that someone was out to get him. As for me, I'm grateful to live in such a wonderful neighborhood. The incident with the driveway and the fire was a difficult time for all of us, but it also brought us closer together. We learned that when we work together, we can overcome any obstacle. And that's a lesson that I'll never forget. In my opinion, this was a great story about the importance of being a good neighbor and respecting each other's property. The old couple in the story were kind and reasonable, and it's a shame that they had to go through such a stressful situation. It's heartening to see how the community came together to support them and to work towards a peaceful resolution. The dramatic ending was a surprise, but it reminded me of how important it is to treat people with respect and kindness. Overall, I thought this was a well-written and engaging story that had a valuable message. The next story is titled HOA Neighbor Stole My Paid Parking Spot and Got Me Towed from My Own Property. My name is Rachel, and I live in an HOA neighborhood that's usually pretty peaceful. We don't have driveways, so we all park in the street or in private parking spots that we can purchase. I had one of these spots, which was incredibly convenient for me, but I never imagined it would cause so much trouble. It all started when my new neighbor Matt moved in next door. He seemed friendly enough at first, but I soon realized that he was very entitled and thought he could do whatever he wanted. One day I came home from work to find his car parked in my spot. I knocked on his door and he told me that he had spoken to the HOA president, who had given him permission to park there. I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I let it go for the night. The next day I woke up early to move my car into the spot before heading off to work. When I returned home, I saw Matt fuming outside his house, but I ignored him and went inside. That's when things started to get really crazy. A few days later, I woke up to find my car missing. I called the police, and they informed me that it had been towed due to reports of an abandoned vehicle. When I went to pick it up, I found out that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I knew immediately that Matt was behind it, but I didn't have any proof. I tried talking to him, but he just laughed and told me to get over it. I felt helpless and frustrated, and I didn't know what to do. But then something unexpected happened. One day I received a letter from the HOA that informed me that my parking spot had been sold to someone else. I couldn't believe it. I had paid for that spot, and now someone else had taken it without my consent. I contacted the HOA, but they were no help. They told me that there had been a mistake and that they couldn't do anything to help me. I was livid. I felt like I was being taken advantage of, and I didn't know what to do. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started doing some research and found out that Matt had a history of being a difficult neighbor. He had caused problems in his previous neighborhood, and I found a lot of negative reviews about him online. I decided to gather as much evidence as I could and bring it to the HOA. I spent weeks compiling information and putting together a case against Matt. Finally, I had enough evidence to prove that he was a problem neighbor, and I brought it to the HOA. To my surprise, they actually listened to me. They reviewed the evidence and decided to take action against Matt. They fined him for his behavior and made him apologize to me. I felt like justice had been served, but I didn't want to let my guard down. I knew that Matt was still capable of causing trouble, so I kept a close eye on him. And then, something even more unexpected happened. One day, I came home to find my car missing again. I immediately called the police, and they informed me that it had been stolen. I couldn't believe it. Not only had someone taken my parking spot, but now they had taken my car too. I was devastated. I felt like I was being targeted, and I didn't know who to trust. But then, something incredible happened. A few days later, the police called me to let me know that they had found my car. I rushed to the impound lot to retrieve my car, and to my surprise, it was in perfect condition. The police told me that they had found it parked in a different neighborhood, and that the person who had taken it had abandoned it and fled on foot. I couldn't believe my luck. It was as if the universe had finally decided to give me a break. I felt like I had finally gotten my life back on track, and I was grateful for the support of the police and the HOA, but even though things were finally looking up, I still had some concerns. I knew that Matt was still out there, and I didn't trust him. I decided to invest in a security system for my home and car just to be safe. For a while, things were quiet. I went about my business, focusing on my job and my hobbies. But then one day I came home to find a note on my front door. It was from Matt, and it was a thinly veiled threat. He told me that he knew where I parked my car and that he would make sure I regretted messing with him. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I called the police, but they told me that there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt like I was back at square one. But then, I had an idea. I decided to confront Matt directly, to see if I could get him to back off. I waited until I saw him outside, and then I approached him. We had a heated argument, and I could see that he was getting angrier by the minute. But then, something unexpected happened. One of my other neighbors who had been watching from their window came outside to see what was going on. They saw that I was in trouble, and they decided to step in. They called the police, and when Matt realized that he was outnumbered, he fled the scene. From that day on, I knew that I had a true friend in my neighbor. They had my back, and they were willing to stand up to bullies like Matt. As for Matt himself, he eventually moved away. I don't know where he went or what he's doing now, but I'm just glad that he's not causing trouble in my neighborhood anymore. Overall, this experience taught me a lot about the importance of standing up for yourself and seeking help when you need it. It also taught me the value of having good neighbors who are willing to support you when things get tough. I'm grateful for the lessons I learned, and I'm hopeful that my neighborhood will continue to be a peaceful and welcoming place for years to come. In my opinion, this story is a perfect example of how small disagreements between neighbors can escalate quickly and become serious issues. It's interesting to see how one person's entitled behavior can cause so much trouble and affect so many people. It's also heartening to see how the protagonist of the story was able to stand up for herself and ultimately get justice. The story serves as a reminder to always be respectful of others and to try to work out conflicts in a peaceful and mature manner. The next story is titled, "Apparently Booking a Seat on a Train is Not a Real Booking If Someone Else Decides to Sit There." After wrapping up an intense business trip in Edinburgh, I was looking forward to returning to my family in London. Knowing that I'd have a 6-hour train journey ahead of me, I made sure to book a window seat with a table so that I could both enjoy the picturesque scenery and catch up on some work. On the day of my journey, I arrived at the bustling Edinburgh Waverley train station with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Navigating through the crowd, I eventually boarded the train and went straight to my assigned seat, only to find a group of 4 guys occupying the table. They seemed to be friends, enjoying a lively conversation, with one of them sitting in my reserved seat. The booking indicator above the seat clearly displayed my reservation. Feeling a bit flustered, I tried to remain polite as I approached the group. "Excuse me," I said, "but I believe you're in my reserved seat." The guy in my seat glanced at me dismissively and replied, "Sorry, mate, but I'm with my friends, and we don't want to split up. The train is packed. You'll have to find another seat." Frustrated, but still determined, I decided to seek assistance from a ticket collector. It took some time for him to make his way through the crowded train, but when he finally arrived, I explained my situation. He asked the guy to move, but the stubborn passenger simply shook his head and repeated his earlier refusal. The ticket collector sighed and said, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but I have no authority to force him out of the seat. Only the police can do that, and they won't come just to remove someone from a seat." "So what now?" I inquired, my patience wearing thin. "You can try to find another seat, but as you can see, the train is quite full," he replied with a helpless shrug. I glanced around the carriage, seeing no available seats, and felt a growing sense of indignation. That's when I noticed the first-class carriage just a few doors down and hatched a bold plan. "I'm going to take a seat in first class," I declared, my voice resolute. "I'll enjoy better surroundings, power sockets, and complimentary refreshments." "You can't sit there, you don't have a booking," the ticket collector protested. "Well, you could call the police to move me, but apparently they won't turn out to move someone out of a seat," I retorted, a daring glint in my eye. Ignoring the ticket collector's disapproving frown, I confidently strode into the first-class carriage and spotted an unoccupied seat. I settled in, relishing the wide, plush seat and the attentive service from the staff. As I sipped my complimentary coffee and began to work on my laptop, I couldn't help but feel a small thrill at my act of defiance. About an hour into the journey, the ticket collector reappeared, accompanied by 2 police officers. My heart raced, but I maintained my composure as the officers approached me. To my surprise, they didn't ask me to leave. Instead, they informed me that they had successfully convinced the guy in my original seat to move. "Apparently," one officer said with a grin, "booking a seat on a train is not a real booking if someone else decides to sit there." With a sheepish smile, I thanked the officers and returned to my original seat. To my delight, the first-class staff even allowed me to keep my complimentary tea and coffee as a gesture of goodwill. The remainder of my journey went smoothly, and I enjoyed the familiar views of the English countryside as the train made its way towards London. I couldn't help but reflect on the day's events, amused by the unexpected turn my train journey had taken. Back in my original seat, I continued working on my laptop, occasionally stealing glances at the group of guys. They seemed to be unfazed by the whole incident, but I noticed that they now spoke in hushed tones, perhaps a little humbled by the outcome. As the train pulled into London's King's Cross station, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Not only had I successfully reclaimed my rightful seat, but I had also managed to make a small stand against what I considered an unfair situation. Gathering my belongings, I stepped off the train and made my way through the bustling station, eager to reunite with my family. My train journey had been far from ordinary, but it had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes a little daring and determination can go a long way in making things right. In the end, I got my reserved seat back, and as a small act of defiance, the first-class staff allowed me to keep my complimentary tea and coffee. It was a thrilling and dramatic turn of events, but it made for one of the most memorable train journeys of my life. And with every retelling of the story, my family and friends couldn't help but share in the excitement and amusement of my daring adventure on the train from Edinburgh to London. In my opinion, this story was a fun and engaging read. I found myself rooting for the protagonist as they stood up for their rights, and I enjoyed the little twist when the police officers showed up. It's a great reminder that sometimes it takes a bit of courage and quick thinking to navigate through life's unexpected challenges. I couldn't help but chuckle at the final outcome, and it just goes to show that even in seemingly mundane situations like a train journey, there's always room for a bit of excitement and adventure. The last story is titled, "She Tried to Stab Me Ever Since I Can Remember." I've been someone who believed in the importance of compassion and understanding. Growing up in a tight-knit community, I witnessed firsthand the power of support and the transformative impact it could have on people's lives. After working for years as a mental health advocate, I developed a strong conviction that empathy and assistance could help even the most troubled souls find their way. I never imagined that this belief would be tested so severely, nor that it would lead to an experience that would forever change my life. A few weeks ago, I received a call from an old college friend named Sarah. She and I had lost touch after graduation, but I knew that she'd struggled with her mental health for years. Her condition had apparently worsened, and now she found herself at a particularly low point, with no place to go. Though we hadn't spoken in ages, I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on her. With my 2 children away on a weekend trip with their grandparents, I figured it was the perfect time to offer Sarah a safe haven and the support she desperately needed. When Sarah arrived, we spent hours catching up on our lives and sharing stories from the past. I listened with empathy as she recounted her struggles with mental illness, the battles she'd fought, and the losses she'd suffered. The first day went surprisingly well, and I felt optimistic that my kindness and understanding could make a difference for her. But on the second night, something inside Sarah snapped. As if possessed by an uncontrollable rage, she launched a brutal attack on me. She bit my leg so hard that it drew blood and attempted to stab me with a pair of scissors. In sheer terror, I managed to escape, running to my neighbor's house at 3 a.m. for help, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. In the chaos, Sarah had broken my screen door, leaving it hanging off its hinges. The police arrived swiftly and found Sarah, naked and unashamed, in my living room. She was recording videos of herself, hurling threats and expressing hope that I would burn to death. They arrested her, and as I stood in shock, I considered the possibility of asking the prosecutor to focus on mental health treatment rather than pressing criminal charges against her. After all, Sarah was clearly in need of help. One of Sarah's friends, a man named Dan, had been urging me to drop the charges from the very beginning. He insisted that a felony conviction would ruin her life, and that her mental health issues warranted a more compassionate response. I was on the fence about his request until I received a screenshot from another friend that made my blood run cold. While I was at my neighbor's house seeking refuge from her attack, Sarah had posted on social media accusing me of being the aggressor. Worse still, she'd shared a Google Maps link to my address. I was horrified by the thought of the danger my children could have faced if they'd been home. The betrayal felt like a knife through my heart. I confronted Dan, telling him that not only would I pursue the initial charges, but I would also request additional ones based on Sarah's dangerous actions. His response was nothing short of infuriating. Dan nonchalantly replied with a screenshot of my Google searched address, arguing that anyone could find it and that Sarah didn't deserve a felony on her record. It was at that moment that I realized the full extent of the betrayal. Both Sarah and Dan had taken advantage of my kindness, and I could not let that go unpunished. I vowed to ensure that Sarah faced the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about protecting my children and my community from any further harm. As I prepared for the legal battle that lay ahead, I found strength in the support of my friends and family. Their encouragement reminded me that I was not alone, and that I had every right to fight for justice. The court proceedings were intense, and I remained steadfast in my pursuit of a fair outcome that would both hold Sarah accountable and ensure that she received the help she needed. During the trial, I discovered that Sarah had a history of violence towards others, fueled by her untreated mental health issues. The revelation only reinforced my determination to see justice served. After an arduous legal process, the court finally reached a verdict. Sarah would be sentenced to a combination of incarceration and court-ordered mental health treatment. This decision, though difficult, seemed to strike the right balance between justice and compassion. As for Dan, I severed all ties with him. I could no longer trust someone who had shown such blatant disregard for the safety and well-being of my family. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about the delicate balance between empathy and self-preservation. Sometimes, in order to protect the ones we love, we must find the courage to make difficult decisions, even when they go against our natural instincts. The impact of this ordeal on my life was profound. My faith in humanity was shaken but not shattered. I realized that while there were people who would take advantage of kindness, there were also countless others who would stand by my side in times of need. My community rallied around me, offering support and understanding that helped me to heal. Months later, an unexpected twist of fate brought a dramatic end to this saga. Sarah, while receiving treatment in a secure facility, managed to make contact with me. In a heartfelt letter, she apologized for the pain and suffering she had caused, expressing deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledged the severity of her mental health struggles and thanked me for helping her confront them, even though it meant facing the consequences of her actions. As I read her words, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't experienced before. Sarah's apology couldn't erase the trauma of what had happened, but it reminded me that people could change, and that the power of compassion should never be underestimated. I didn't know what the future held for Sarah, but I hoped that she would find a path to healing and redemption. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.